Lovely. Thanks so much to NEC for inviting Ross and myself to speak this afternoon. Ross and myself were two of three people working together on drafting the new contract. We've also got Ben Walker. I can't just spot Ben. So there you are, Ben. Ben, I'm sure would be delighted to speak over lunch with anyone about it. But yeah, we were tasked with drafting the new NEC FM contract. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background to that and the reasons why. And then Ross is going to join us and tell you what we've done and where the project is so far. That's us. So what are we doing? Well, NEC is working with the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management to develop a single FM contract that is not only more acceptable to the FM industry, both service providers and clients, but more appropriate. It uses a language that we use in FM day by day. And at the same time, though, you'll see that the draft very much reflects the language that's used within NEC. It's written in that same style, but some of the language we use is FM'd, as it were. The idea is also that the contract can be used internationally, not just in the UK, and indeed the idea for the contract emerged from the Institute's international special interest group who'd run a seminar about contracting across borders, and one of the challenges that came up over and over again was having a single form of contract that would work in that way. So that's a little bit about the background. Why are we doing it? Well, in my role as a consultant, we work with a number of clients, and we see day after day the need for really good contract management. And that's not just client side, but also service provider side as well. And one of the things that would really help that is having consistency in our contracts. And that's just what we plan to achieve through the FM contract. The market is getting more diverse and more specialised. So gone are the days where an FM contract talks about the management of hard assets in a building. More and more now, we're talking about complex waste management contracts, hospitality contracts, cleaning contracts that are not just office cleaning, but cleaning sort of highly technical areas as well. And services are absolutely critical and core to running our businesses. At the moment, what we tend to see is that the clients will dictate the form of contract that they want their FM providers to use. And that's okay because it gives consistency for the client. But what we tend to see is that those contracts aren't always appropriate. We need to add an awful lot of schedules. We need to vary them slightly because we need them to work for services as opposed to projects. But can you imagine if you're a service provider, and maybe a medium-sized service provider, maybe with 50 contracts across the country? You could have 50 different forms of contract because they're all client-defined. Imagine the benefits to a supplier of having a single form of contract. Yes, lots of different scopes, and they're all going to be slightly different, but having that single form of contract will bring efficiencies to the marketplace, and that will help with cost savings as well. Just a little bit about the FM market. IWFM did some research a couple of years ago, and the value of the FM market in 2017 was put at around about 120 billion. Now, I appreciate that's probably quite small on some of the scale of some of the projects we've been talking about. However, the FM industry employs around about 10% of the UK workforce. The revenue might be slowing, but there's also a demand for specialist services. So I mentioned about waste management services. Last year we were involved in procuring a contract on a manufacturing site, and there were 80 different waste streams. Now, you know, on the scale of things, that's a level of complexity we've not seen in the market for quite some time, and that's growing. Particularly when we see that the FM sector is really recognising the benefits of the workplace for employers, and having a good workplace where people are happy, where people can really add something to their employer. Facilities management can really help with that, and hence about a year ago the British Institute of Facilities Management became the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management, recognising the difference that a good workplace can make. Indeed, I've highlighted a report there that was published in December 2018, the Stoddart Review, called The Workplace Advantage. I'm very happy to send a copy to anyone who'd be interested. But this talked about the benefit of a good workplace culture that facilities management can really support with. And the suggestion there is that productivity can be increased by at least 1% through good workplace management. And that in turn has benefits, financial benefits to the marketplace. Just a little bit more about that market. So 120 billion. We've heard about some huge contracts this morning. Typically, the size of contracts that we work with might be something like 1 million to 20 million. Okay? Those contracts typically will be renewed every 3, maybe every 5 years. Now, I'm going to let you do the maths. If we've got 120 billion made up of contracts, maybe a maximum of 20 million that are renewed every 3 years, that's an awful lot of contracts out there, an awful lot. And even if only 1% of those contracts was through a consistent, a standardised contract, the benefits for the workplace could be huge, just in terms of savings, but also about improved contract management by having that consistency across the sector. So that's why we're doing it. I think Ross is going to come up and talk to us about how we've been developing the contract and the next steps. Thanks.
A number of you know me around the room. You've met me a number of times, and you know that I'm a passionate advocate for the term service contracts. Well, as passionate as I ever am about anything. And I've always been trying to push it, trying to raise its profile in the face of the big projects that we've just been looking at, the glamorous projects around the world of the ECC world. And there am I, beating my little drum against the term service contract and trying to get people to think about it. Imagine what it feels like to then have the Institute of Facilities Management come to you and say, well, we like your contract, but nobody wants to use it because it doesn't use the right language and we don't think it works and it's too construction orientated and. So that was the push that we came to when we started to look at this. So we sat down with the industry and said, the NEC and the, as it was then, BIFM and now IWFM, sat down and said, okay, what is it that's causing the problem? Because we all believe it should work, but yet you don't want to use it. So we sat down with the industry, and I've got a list of the various different meetings on there, and I don't think we need to go through them too much, except to say that the industry has been involved, and we've had various different discussions with people to say, this is what we think you might want, what do you think? And they've come back and said, no, we don't want like that. Yes, we'd like this. And there's been the constant tension between the small and the big, and the national and the international, and the people who want a contract that says everything, and the people who want a contract that says nothing, because they're using it for everything. Just think for a moment of where that contract that the NEC developed has been used, right from the very large stuff we've just heard in Australia, right through to simple cleaning contracts, maintenance contracts, ground maintenance, roads maintenance across most of the UK. The variety is enormous, so how can you write a contract that fits? So we sat down with various people to try and create something which the FM industry will say, yes, this is ours, this can be used. Because if, as the NEC, we want it to be used right across the industry, it's got to be across everything, not just the construction part of it. And the important one possibly is that bottom line for publication. And we hope to publish 4 contracts, the main contract, the subcontract, and the short form and its subcontracts in the autumn of this year. So I've got just 3 slides or 4 slides, just picking up a few points, not a lot of detail, but just a few thoughts. We want it to be a solution for everyone in the FM industry. We need to change the terminology. It's silly, isn't it, how often words get in the way. But the FM industry doesn't talk about contractors, it talks about service providers. It doesn't talk about defects, they're construction orientated. It talks about service failures. So if that's what is needed to make it acceptable, then let's think about using it. It has other things that, in fact, most of us who've written these forms of contracts for years have been putting in anyway, like mobilisation and demobilisation plans. If you're going to start something that's going to last for 10 years, you spend a lot of time thinking about it. When you get to the end of a 10-year contract, you want to offset it and run it off properly. And you'll notice there we're talking about ISO terminology. There's a new ISO form out that talks about the FM world. Why not use its language? But there's a need too for guidance. If this is going to be used internationally and nationally for all sorts of work, then we can't be too detailed. So they need a lot more guidance for the smaller clients who may not have used this sort of thing before. So I want to pick out 3 particular areas. And those of you who've used these forms of contracts will say, well, I've seen these before. The industry talks about and uses call-off contracts an awful lot. A road maintenance type of work, or anything else for that matter that has work, there's often a sort of basic service. But there's a need too to call off individual parts of work. I need this piece of work fixing. I need this pothole fixing. I need this, let's go down to basics. I just need this bit of cleaning done. I need a mechanism, an ordering call-off system, which the contract, as it stood, doesn't have. All the ones that go out have them, but they didn't have it as a basic part. So we've added one into the contract. And still left the task orders there, but again, we moved them into project orders. We're just changing a language, but we're changing the thinking of what you do and the way the contract might work and might appeal to people who understand what's going on. The incentive mechanism of the standard ECC and even the term service contract talks about key performance indicators. And it talks about performance, penalties, wrong word really, disadvantages. And yet the industry doesn't work that way. The industry tries to set objectives. And the industry then says, now what will we do when we've got those objectives? This is what I want. What am I going to do if I don't get what I want or if I get more than I want? And the DBOC contract began to pick up this picture when it first got written. And we've adopted that thinking to say, let's assist our clients to determine what it is that they really want. And then what are they going to do about it if they don't get it? And that's the performance table and the service objectives. Now, if you stand back for a moment and think about it, that's quite complicated. And yet clients are doing it all the time. They may not realize they're doing it, but all the time they're saying, this is the cleaning process I want, this is the regime I need, and this is what I do and what I want to do, and how I would like to work with our contractors, or in this case, service providers, if I don't get it. So in a sense, we have created that and changed and brought into this contract from other forms of contracts in the NEC suite, this idea of trying to work through with clients what it is they want, but that's where the guidance will be needed because it's fundamental to a contract. We've heard about it so many times. What is it that I want from my contractor? How can I work with them to get what I think I need? And how can I encourage them to provide it? How can they encourage me to define it well? Might be a different question they would ask. When we first wrote the term service contract, we worked on the assumption that there wouldn't be any design in the work really, so there was nothing in the contract for design. As you've just heard from Anne, it's being used for more and more sophisticated types of work where the contractors, the service providers, are in fact providing design. We heard a contractor earlier this morning talk about the problems they have where they're not sure where design is allocated to who's carrying liability. So these clauses have been brought in for their term contracts, for this new FM contract. So for those of you who know the clauses really specifically, we have brought the X15 option through with some amendments to fit what it needs to do. And I think this is my last one. A small point, and yet it isn't. It's fundamental to the way that these contracts work. In the construction world, if something doesn't work, you want it putting right. In the service maintenance world, if something's gone wrong, it may be too late to put it right. If I want my dustbins emptied by 7:30 in the morning and they empty it at 8:30, they couldn't put that failure right. So how can we build this in? We're concerned about the failure to provide a service, not a defect. It's language again, and yet that's what we need. So this has been brought into it, recognising sometimes service failures can't be corrected. Sometimes they can. And pick up what we do about it when that happens, through the use of key performance indicators possibly, through defining what it is we want. So just a few thoughts there about what's going into it. It'll be coming through in a few months, but if you want to ask any more, you've seen Anne, you've seen me, do come and ask us.
Thank you very much.